Don't know where to start building your fantasy world? Do you need more? Does it make sense? Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination. This is the place that will help prime your mind. Now, it's time to heat up the forge, break out the mithril ingots and hammer. Welcome to the World Builder's Anvil. I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram. Let's sup from the mug of Java and build. Now, welcome back to another episode of the World Builder's Anvil. This episode is on the races of your world-ish. And I say world-ish because I don't really know if you're doing a world or a neighborhood in a city, or if you're doing the grand galactic everythingness, which would really take a long time to build. Now, when I talk about races, you have to understand to me, races itself is sort of like talking about a species. I don't mean, necessarily just a skin tone difference. Things that have either evolved separately over time, or things that just have different genetic backgrounds. For example, my world, there's sort of a goblinoid and a humanoid strand of really humanoids, because they're both like hominid kind of walking creatures. But they did not biologically develop the same way. Ergo, they're not genetically compatible, which is good or bad, depends on how you look at it. Now, how you define races is going to be very dependent on your world, and everything I'm saying here could be wrong, especially this episode. Really treat it as food for thought. Don't think that just because I say you can't do something, you shouldn't. And don't think because I say you can do something, you should. It's going to be very dependent upon the race itself. Now, if you want to look at races differently than I do, you are allowed to do that. My definition of race will not match up with most other people's definition of race if you talk about the context of our world. They talk about race in our world more as a shift in skin color, really. And maybe some minor genetic differences. I don't know about that. That's way beyond my mental capacity. I'm just trying to define it in a way that it's consistent throughout my world. It's not a major topic, however, even though I do like to talk about it. One of the first things I like to do with the races, I like to define essentially its traits. And the traits are the things that almost everything in the race has, even though there could be anomalies around the edges. For example, with humans here on Earth, we all have vision and hearing, except for the few of us that don't. And now some people have lost hearing, or they don't have full hearing as well. So there's kind of a scale from all humans have vision to most humans have vision, and then it sort of goes off to total blindness. So in a culture that has night vision, you might have people in the culture who don't have night vision. And that's not very important when it comes to a race itself. However, that should give you food for thought when you're working on the cultures and how they treat people who vary from the norm. But not important when it comes to races. It's really just traits to me are the things that, let's say 95% of the population has. And maybe you have some outliers on both ends that are exceedingly above and exceedingly below. Once I have the common traits down, and I look at too sort of like from an RPG standpoint of, if an average strength is 10, and I use 10 because I'm a GURPS player and I love GURPS, and 10 is the average strength in GURPS. So as you get higher from 10 is the basic normal strength for that race. The further you get away from 10 going down, the weaker they are. And if you vary too much, they're really probably outside of the scope. They're not in the same playing field anymore as another race. And maybe they're like angels or demons or a really powerful alien race. However, you have to keep in mind that if you want balance in your world and you want multiple races to exist, if they can overpower each other, why would they still have other people around? Especially if there's like strife back and forth. They probably wouldn't. So once I have the idea of the traits and the attributes of a race, their strength, their intelligence, all of those different things that define them, and I will go into more detail on this later. But once you have all of those things that define a race, Then you have to find the maximum and minimum allowable movement. Legless and Middle-earth is probably not your average elf. I'm hoping not, because once again, if he was, how could the elves ever lost a war, especially after watching the movies? I mean, Legless could breathe and whole armies would fall down. So he's probably near the maximum extent an elf can be, at least in physical prowess. Now, on the other hand, you could have Frank the elf, who never made the book cut. He got cut straight from the movie, too. He was the clumsy, ugly elf. He might be able to exist in the context of your race, too. So don't forget about Frank, because it's really easy. You're going to always think about Legless, but don't forget about Frank. Frank the elf is there, and Frank really needs your help. He wants to make a story someday. Or you're going to have Rico the orc, who's the most handsome guy in your world. But people don't believe it because he's an orc, and they go, you're an orc, and you're ugly, and you're evil. You can't pick me up. And then he picks him up because he's Rico, and he's just that cool. So don't forget about Rico. Don't forget about Frank. You're going to have exceptions within your races, and it will have different meanings to different things. Let's say I have a world, which I do, and in my world, goblins have no hair. Goblins are typically considered ugly by the other races. However, sometimes goblins have hair. And guess what happens when that happens? When they have hair like the other races do, they are considered on par in the attractive department. So goblins can be almost as sexy as everyone else, maybe more so than some humans, especially if you look at the insides. My goblins and orcs are very clean and good-looking internally. Now, once I have those two things down, I like to think about the appearance. And I typically use more sort of traditional mythology, whether it's races like elves and dwarfs. I modify them to make them part of my world. However, I take base ideas. I don't vary so much on height. That's more of a nutritional thing in my world. Even though some races are naturally a little bit smaller, a little bit taller. If they're a lot shorter, how could they survive? Why could hobbits make it in a world of big men? And it's not so important for his world, but for mine it is. And that's going to vary world to world. However, if you try to develop a unique race, you got to think about that. How does it fit into the ecosystem of your world, this race? How does the species survive to become intelligent? And there's other things saying you couldn't have a small intelligent race of little hoppity creatures. That would be kind of cool. If you want to write that story, that's your story to write. Some other things races are not. They don't all live in one country. Or they're not all one horde. Even in Lord of the Rings, where it's almost like that, you have the goblins and orcs are basically the same thing, but not quite. And you have some from Moria, you have some from Mordor. You have these little patches of Goblin Town. You have these little patches of them, and each of them have their own rulers, and they maybe come under the banner of Mordor when they're told to, but beyond that, they're in it for themselves. And they maybe and probably do have slightly different cultures. And I think they should. I don't think Tolkien got too much in the cultures of the orcs because they were the bad guys. But it's something you should keep in mind for your world is they're not really all one nation. And they might be for a period of time once again. But likelihood, if your world develops over time, there's going to be orcs who get trapped in part of the world and conquered by a different race. And maybe they become a culture to that race. And maybe even over a long period of time, if there's a lack of connection, maybe even they develop into a new strain of orc because they've genetically changed enough. They're not so much like the orcs they used to be. They're slightly different, so they become a new race. It all depends on how you want to cut it because it's your world. Because once again, I'm going to say I'm wrong on every point I said here today. This was a completely meaningless episode, so I really appreciate you listening. Actually, no, I don't really think it's completely meaningless. But it's something to think about. Races they're descriptions of animals in your world that have intelligence. That's really all they are. They don't really have anything to do with culture, even though their traits will impact the culture they're in. Maybe they need a certain thing they have to eat to survive. That would be very central to any culture that group belonged to. So keep in mind that, one, races are not going to be a photocopy of each other. And two, I'm wrong with that too. Because you might have like an android race that literally builds itself as an exact duplicate of itself. And that's fine. So races are complicated, but bear in mind, they shouldn't take up a lot of world building time. They're a description of something that exists that you want to use in your world and your stories. And that's all they are. Beyond that, leave the other brain thoughts on the impacts of what that means when you're developing a culture. Now, there might be times you have to go back and tweak a race. Do it before you share out the information of what the race really is. Because once you do that, you're kind of stuck with it, and you could unbalance your world unknowingly by making one race way too powerful and not having something about them that limits them from just taking over the world. The rating for this episode is basic. If you're in fantasy, if you're in sci-fi, you're going to be dealing probably with non-human races. And they might not even be from our plane of existence. But in most forms of fantasy or science fiction I've ever read, they're not strictly dealing with humans. And sometimes there are no humans at all. So this is a very basic topic that you should think about. And early, kind of the way I do it in my mind map is where they show up in the mind map. These are all the things that I do kind of early on. I just sketch them out early on and I flesh them out as I go deeper. The world building task for today is create a list of all of your races. Do it in a spreadsheet form. It'll be easier later on. And, if you want to put down just a couple key words that you think of when you think of your race, just create a couple columns and say, beautiful, old, weak with the sword. Those are 3 possible traits for this race. And you maybe change it when you develop the race, but it just kind of gives you some food for thought for when you really flesh out your race and get a little bit more into the height, weight kind of details, if that's relevant, obviously. The real world task for the day is the same one as yesterday. So what I'm going to have to say is, when you write out something and there's a minor thing that you put in here and you don't think about it, think about it. Because I have the exact same task for the day that I did last time, and that's bad. Because I wasn't thinking about the task, I was thinking about world building. So sometimes you have to peel back the world building a little bit and think more about the real world. That will make your life better. The tease for the next episode is one of the 3rd rails of society, religions. It should be fun. I look forward to the discussions we're going to have about races of your world today. Go to my show notes and look for more mind maps coming out in my email newsletter at gardul.com, gardul.com. And as always, make sure to go to gardul.com. That's gardul.com for the show notes. It'll be under podcasting, World Builders Anvil. That's a great place to get all of the information from the episode that you've just listened to and to see all the resources that we've talked about in this episode. Thanks for joining us this episode of the World Builders Anvil. Please be sure to rate and review us in iTunes, and please help get the word out to your friends about our show. And join me, Jeffrey W. Ingram at gardul.com, to see the progress of my world and learn why I made the choices I did. And please contact me and let me know the topics you would love to hear in the future. Now strike while the myth rolls high.